So it's a pretty fairly nice day today, and I figured I might as well, spend some time with whoever may be interested, with you, in a bit of mindfulness. Reviewing the Bible earlier on this morning, coming across Ecclesiastes chapter 4, in a particular verse that I've always loved, and just move to speak on it, move to say more about it. So Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9 through 11. Ecclesiastes 4, 9 through 11. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up. Again, if two lie together, then they have heat. But how can one be warm alone? And so, turning to the scripture this morning, and I love how you can just go into the Bible for anything. Sometimes you may not even know the kind of reason that you need to go into the Bible for, but you can already have in the back of your mind a need for something that you need to hear, that you need to review, that you need to think on, that you need to exercise. No matter where you land on in the Bible, that's really what you need to hear for that period of time, for that moment, for that day, for that second. And so this is, I find it interesting because I've been doing a lot of talking, whether on my Justification Live or whether on Justification or anywhere else really, about the need to get away from self's opinion of what the religious conversation should be, self's opinion for what the devotional experience should be, and removing from self so that the conversation can begin to feel for itself. So that the conversation can begin to feel for itself, so that the conversation can begin to understand the type of character that it is supposed to have in its particular experience. My content has been, revolving around the different conversations that I have had with individuals concerning their religious experience and concerning their thought, their interaction, their relation with religion in general. How they believe that it has somehow insulted them, and how they can prove that it has lowered or demeaned their intelligence. And yet they don't want to stop trusting that the experience, that the journey, isn't supposed to be more genuine than what it is. They don't want to move on without understanding that more genuine, that more authentic approach. That's my content. And that's my content because that's where my approach originally came from. It still comes from me understanding that after going through the things that I went through, that there's a specific vision that the conversation needs to have that is independent of anyone else, of the religious world, and also of our own self. And so it's that notion of being prepared enough, or preparing self enough to journey alone. And that's really what I wanted to touch on at this time when I read this verse in Ecclesiastes 4, because while the journey may seem as though we are alone, we're not alone. While the journey may seem as though we are alone, we really aren't alone. And I'm saying we in the sense of our conversation. There's a lot of ways that the Bible can get us to comprehend the type of experience it would have us to comprehend and to have. There are different things that we can go through, but the general, and the one that I find we all have in common, and I mean individuals tuning into me, that we all have in common, is that the aspect of religious traditional understanding and exercise, habit and routine not being sufficient enough for the character that is within, for the inward person that is within. And so the idea of understanding that there is more, yet not understanding how to attain to that more. and the Bible allowing me to understand that there are some gaps in there that have to be filled in by no other individual, not even by ourselves, but by the conversation feeling for its own self. Reason being, reason being is that the conversation is to understand its spouse. Our conversation has a spouse. Our conversation has a life partner. And this life partner is given to our spouse from the moment that we decide to make our journey with the scriptures what it's supposed to be. Problem with that is, and I may be getting, maybe sidetracking here, problem with that is that we tend to, when we feel the spark or the need of the Bible, that the Bible has become the most important thing in our life, we tend to take that spark and we tend to place it in a religious denomination. And so the religious denomination now has that spark. We find that spark and we like to place it into a scholar, into an expert, into an opinion. We like to find it and place it into something or someone. Meanwhile, the spark is being handled by another creed from another conscience, and we are willingly giving that spark over, along with willingly giving our conversation over to all of that. And we're not really understanding, we're not really knowing the type of character that our conversation is, because we are willingly consenting to give it away because we trust that the denominational theory has a better grasp of it than we could ever. So that's part of the problem of why that idea of, not idea, I should say, the experience of loneliness exists. Why the experience of loneliness within the religious experience exists. It exists because we are giving our conversations confidence to a denominated theory that we have not proven, and that will really never seem as just to us because it is not coming from our conscience, despite how much we may think to believe on it or whatever have it. It will never resonate with us because it is not us. It is not us because our conversation is an individual character of its own. Being an individual character of its own, our conversation is a character. And having an individual character within its own, our conversation, we have to know that along with that character is a mind, and that mind is the spouse of our conversation. Within our conversation's character is a mind of devotion, is a mind of understanding, is a mind of belief that needs cultivating. And when cultivated, this is supposed to be the spouse that we journey with in our devotional journey together. And so another verse, another couple verses that I have just to go along with those verses in the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 4, turning now to Malachi 2, 13 through 16. Malachi 2, 13 through 16. And I'm always asked where I get this idea of the devotional conversation's spouse. Where do I get this idea of the conversation being married from? This is a concept I've brought out or presented in justification. It's there, but there are so many other subjects that get in the way of just that one thought, that in order to make that one thought make sense, other thoughts have to come into play, have to be organized, and have to be structured so that one thought of marriage will make sense. And I get the idea of the devotional conversation's spouse and needing to be married to the spirit of its mind, to the spirit of the mind within its character, from the Bible actually, from this passage that I'm going to read from Malachi chapter 2, Malachi 2, 13 through 16. And this have you done again, covering the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping, and with crying out, insomuch that he regardeth not the offering any more, or receiveth it with good will at your hand. Yet you say, wherefore? Because the Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth. Again, I'll just read that again. You say, why? Wherefore? Because the Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously. Yet is she thy companion and the wife of thy covenant. And did not he make one? Yet had he the residue of the Spirit. And wherefore one? That he might seek a godly seed. Therefore take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth. For the Lord, God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away. For one covereth violence with his garment, saith the Lord of hosts. Therefore take heed to your spirit, that ye deal not treacherously. So I get this idea of the conversation's spouse from this passage in the book of Malachi, and also throughout from the book of Isaiah and throughout the Bible and along the way. But I like to always go back here in Malachi because this quote is to me very powerful. And I always, when I do read it, I like to begin just meditating on Malachi 2. This isn't a part of it, but I think I might be just going off here. Malachi 2 in verse 13, where it says, covering the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping, and with crying out. That always reminds me of the book of John, where you find Mary standing outside of the tomb, weeping, wailing, and crying out, and then her Lord appearing thereafter. I always like to see that, because while that's in the book of John as a form of, homage to what should appear next in the form of resurrection, you have here in the book of Malachi the dislike of the living God for that practice, and it's there as a practice in the book of John, as related in the book of Ezekiel chapter 8, the weeping and the wailing for Tammuz. Find that interesting. Jumping to 14, that's when you really get into the meat of that wife, that spouse, because we do. From the moment that we find something attractive within the scriptures, we are given the opportunity to have a conversation with the mind within the Bible. We don't create it, we don't invent it, we never gave ourselves this belief. Something happened and it was given to us. Along with this given to us, along with the rising conversation given to us, is given to our conversation a character and a heart of its character. The heart of our conversation's character, this is the spouse of our journey with our conversation. And this passage in Malachi is sort of a condemnation to individuals that have been hard and violent against the spouse of their conversation, or the wife of their youth. The wife of their youth. If wife for male, husband for female, still I like to use the word spouse to keep that, because it fits for both sexes, both genders, male and female. Every single one of us entering into a relationship, or accepting the Bible to be more than simply just a book, but something special to us for whatever reason, we are given the opportunity to have a relationship with it. Having a relationship with it, we are freely given a spouse, a spirit of mind for our devotional conversation. And it is our conversation and the spirit of our conversation's mind that are to come together to form a happy marriage, a happy balance. Our conversation needs a relationship with the spirit of its mind. The spirit of our conversation's mind needs a relationship with our conversation. When we let something get in the way of that, well, then we are defiling the covenant that we have established with our conversation. Remember, we didn't give ourselves a belief, we didn't give ourselves any kind of anything. We attribute and ought to attribute our fondness, our care for the Bible, to the ways of life working through the living God, for a particular will and wisdom for our person through these words. So, for me, I've always seen my relationship with the Bible as a gift. I don't own it. This isn't something to claim. This isn't something to believe that my opinion is greater than anybody else's, or that my opinion is even greater than my own opinion. You become empty because you didn't give yourself this. I didn't give myself this. I simply accepted it. And accepting this conversation, I accepted the mind that came with it. And the mind of my conversation will not be the mind of your conversation, and your conversation's mind will not be the mind of another individual's conversation. Individual minds for individual conversations. These are individual relationships that our conversation needs to have with its heart. And the issue here is that the book of Malachi is overall talking about the heads of Israel, the heads of the priesthood, the priests and the pastors and the ministers, how they are doing contrary to what they should be doing to the heart of their conversation. They're not edifying the spirit of their conversation's mind. They're abusing the spouse that has been freely given to them with other things, and violently with other things, for whatever they have in their heart. And so there is a call to stop. There is a call to stop and to remember that you have been given a conversation, and with your conversation, your conversation being an infant, from those infant years, you have been fixed together with a wife, with a spouse, with a husband. You have been fixed together with a spouse in those infant years. And even up until this time, nothing has changed. Your spouse is there. Your spouse is there, and you two ought to grow together. But the condemnation is that there has not been growth together. There has been a putting away of the spouse that has been freely given, and that spouse freely given has been substituted for violence. For violence. And in the book of Psalm 119, there is a verse there that says, they have done violence to thy law. They have made void thy law. So when we're seeing that there's violence committed against the conversation, and we're seeing that there is a putting away of the spirit of the mind freely given to the conversation, well, we're seeing that there is within the heart of the conversation a rejection of the living God's law. There is within the heart of the conversation a rejection and a failure to accept, a failure to care to exercise the living God's law. And the living God's law, we can say 10 commandments, but in order to really have any sort of confidence in those 10 commandments, there is a law that the living God has given, Isaiah 51:4. That law serving as a light and as a judgment. This is a law of regeneration for the conversation's thoughts and feelings. Allowing our conversation to fall away from that experience, from that discipline, well, that causes the conversation to not care for the standard established within those 10 commandments. Which 10 commandments, they are found in Genesis chapter 1, Genesis 2, and Genesis 3. So let's not think that we have to follow some, thing. We have to understand the philosophy that is within Genesis 1, 2, and 3 within our heart to maintain that. Well, that's the trend that our conversation should be going in, but our conversation isn't, due to something within it. But we should know that our conversation has a heart. We should know that our conversation is going to be crying out for itself eventually, the more that we continue to not allow it to have the experience that it needs to have. We should be able to understand that just as we as human beings want our independence. I don't want to be controlled. Any relationship that, you could think of and somebody's controlling you, you go, I don't want to be controlled. I don't want this, I don't want that. It's the same thing for our conversation. But the thing is that we haven't allowed our conversation to have the voice that it needs in order to voice that complaint. Meanwhile, we have a human impulse guiding a human spiritual experience, and we will never know that our conversation is lacking its spouse, because we are trying to fill the void of cultivating that relationship with a one-sided, one-tracked script of a routine for a particular religious theory or experience or journey. But our conversation isn't supposed to be alone on this journey. Our conversation is to understand its spouse. Our conversation is to understand its partner. Our conversation is to understand itself. From understanding itself, that means that our conversation is supposed to feel. It's supposed to go through everything that we as a human being go through. Imagine the disappointments that you go through. Imagine all of the disappointments and the sorrows, and also the joys and the high points, all of the failed expectations, all of the anticipation, all of the anxiety. Our conversation is to go through that with the scriptures. Our conversation is to feel that. So respecting our conversation's body enough to be able to step away from it so that it can have its own experience, so that it can have its own experience so that it can understand its heart. Understanding its heart, it can be able to understand just where it is supposed to go in its journey and where it is supposed to return to. And that's also the key. Because we never gave our conversation its character, because we never gave ourselves this passion for the scriptures, our conversation has to return home. Entered into the denominated theory, we think that that's home, but it's not home. Entered into whatever opinion we have, we think that that's home, but it's not home. Our conversation will never feel settled. Our conversation will continue to jump from house to house, from church to church, from pastor so-and-so to pastor so-and-so, from expert to expert, from website to website, because our conversation is missing home. Our conversation wants home. And when our conversation can understand the home that it is missing, our conversation can find the peace that it needs in its journey to live to its creator, to live to the living God as is supposed to and as is directed from the mind within the scriptures. And so when I read these verses in the book of Ecclesiastes 4, two are better than one. How can one find warmth when he is alone? Our conversation is going to feel very, very cold if we don't allow it to build up the confidence that it needs personally in its own heart. Our conversation is to grow cold and soon enough pass away because of its not taking on the responsibility and moving into a personal accountability of the type of experience that it personally needs to have. The book of Matthew says that it is because of iniquity. Iniquity shall run hot because many are cold. The book of Matthew says that iniquity shall run hot because many are cold. And you could say that that's true. When our conversation becomes very cold, well then dissonance against it will become very hot. When our conversation is not fed, we will then begin to hate our experience and not want nothing from it. We will begin to hate everything connected to our experience and everything about it because it's not being fed. When our conversation isn't being fed, what else can it do but not be hot? It will be cold. But concerning the church of Laodicea, the counsel is, I wish thou wert lukewarm. Because if you're lukewarm, at least you have the ability to make the decision to be either hot or cold. You're not in a state of hotness, you're not in a state of coldness, you're lukewarm. Now, being lukewarm isn't anything positive. That means you're nominal. That means your experience is fake, yet real enough to an extent to where it can bypass that fakeness for the realness that is intended. You're lukewarm. So the mind within the scriptures would have us lukewarm as opposed to a full-on hotness, as opposed to a full-on coldness. We are to be, in a sense, balanced when entering into an experience with the scriptures. And yet we will become unbalanced due to our conversation not having the experience with itself that it needs. It is from that lacking that I have so many interactions with so many individuals about where they would project their conversation to be going because their conversation has grown cold. Keep in mind, on the inside, their conversation is hot. It's just their experience has made it grow cold. And so they believe that it is a cold experience when they are just hot on the inside for something more penetrating. And that's sort of, that's the twist that we can land ourselves into when we allow ourselves to believe that the matrix called the religious world is everything that there is to know about the mind within the Bible, when it's not. When we allow the Bible to speak to us, and when we allow our past experiences to be able to make sense of the present for the purpose of a future vision of how to handle our conversation, well then everything changes. Everything changes because we are giving rise, and we are allowing to have risen up in our conversation, our conversation's character. And so coming across these verses, I just felt moved to talk about this because I, in my own personal experience, find it to be completely important. It's not really easy to maintain the type of devotional experience the Bible is calling for. It takes time and it takes patience, and it also takes years with the mind and the culture that is within the Bible. It's not an easy journey because there has to be a care for self at the end of it. There has to be a level of empathy for self at the end of it. There has to be a sense of hurt within your human being. And from that sense of hurt within your human being, a care to do something about the hurt that exists therein. So it's the hurt individual that will be able to better appreciate what it means not to be hurt. It's the hurt individual that will appreciate what it means to discovering character within. It is the hurt individual that will be able to cherish and value the kind of thought process that goes into being able to separate the human being from the being of the conversation. And that's, again, that's not easy. But if we are able and willing to do it, as it says, for the high prize and for the high calling, we will be able to understand the call to accept the spouse freely given to us. Because it is the spirit of our conversation's mind that is supposed to manage the house. The spirit of our conversation's mind, our spouse, is to manage the house. And the house is in the physical house, in the primary sense. The house is the house of our devotional conversation's character. It is the spirit of our conversation's mind that is supposed to manage how we handle things, what we let go of, what affects us, what doesn't, what we remember in the time of need to remember, what we forget in the time of forgetting, what we build up in the time of building up, what we build down or would tear down in the time of building down or tearing down. So our conversation and the way that we respond to it, in a primary sense, it has a lot to do with how we respond to our human being. So our human being being able to rationalize its own living experience, our human being able to rationalize the type of journey that it is called to experience. All of that plays into the part of humbling the heart, and that's so important. Having a heart that is able to be humbled to learn, having a teachable spirit. A teachable spirit is important. A teachable spirit is important because if we are able to allow our conversation to become teachable to the spirit of its own mind, and not that it is a ruler of its own self, but that as it is going through the scriptures and that it is acquiring understanding and exercising and retaining wisdom and exercising that wisdom, it is becoming a learner by its own experience. When we're able to do that, when we're able to allow the type of humility in that calls for, we will be able to do the same thing for a live human being. We will be able to do the same thing for the human spouse, that we are to have. It won't be an imbalance. We will be able to demonstrate something more positive, and although we are still human, and although our experience is imperfect, and although it takes a lot of time, patience, and practice with self to get to there, failure being a part of it, learning being a part of it, we will be able to have a forgiving spouse depending on the manner of display that we display concerning our relation to the mind within the Bible. So the Bible isn't just about a religion and then that's it. The Bible is practical self-management, practical self-development, practical growth for the human being. First through the cultivation and the development of the devotional conversations, thoughts, and feelings. So when I came across this verse, that kind of went through my mind immediately, because I am someone that values the spouse that the living God has given me. And when I'm saying, again, spouse, I'm saying the spirit of my conversation's youth, the spirit of my conversation's mind. From the moment that I said that I will accept the lifestyle that you would have me live, accepting the spirit of my conversation's mind to be that comfort for me and my conversation. That's something that to this day, that I write, and I continue the program Justification just for this very foundation of the conversation, understanding its practical need for the spirit of its mind. And of course, there's going to be times of, isolation isn't for everyone. Isolation isn't for everyone. But the conversation needing isolation is for every experience. So the conversation needs to be isolated unto its own self with the scriptures to develop a mind of its own, a character of its own, for a fashion of its own. Because two are so much better than one. The conversation is better when with the spirit of its mind than without it. The spirit of our mind is so much better with our conversation than without it. We will suffer so much. We will suffer so much if we don't take the time to allow our conversation to grow familiar with its experience so that it can understand the spouse that is committed to it. We will put ourselves through so much hardship due to the unwillingness to accept the humility that's necessary to build up the character of our conversation. And again, it takes a lot, whether you are coming from religion out of it, or whether you are an outsider entering into the Bible with something, with nothing attached. No matter what, there's a struggle. It's difficult no matter what. But the way that we in our conversation can get used to the journey, not simply just growing familiar with words within the scriptures, and not simply allowing those words to work within our life, but allowing a kind of resonance, allowing a type of frequency with everything that is going on, the combination of the experience and so forth. Because two, at the end of the day, is better than one. And two being better than one, we have the opportunity for warmth, because one cannot be warm alone. One cannot be warm alone. And so that's the thing. The warmth of marriage. The individual marriage that our conversation needs to have is one for warmth. Because we're going to go through cold seasons in life. We're going to go through cold seasons in life. Even when we are around who we would call loved ones, even when we are around individuals, life is still going to be very cold. But what can help make life that much warmer is acknowledging and remembering the spouse that is connected to our conversation. The warmth given from our conversation's heart to our human being, the warmth given from the spirit of our conversation's mind to our human being, is a warmth that we need as human beings having this living experience. That's why it's in the Bible. And that's why it's necessary to the Bible's mind for us to acknowledge. And so with that on my mind, I wanted to just share these thoughts, because I to this day I still live by them. And to this day I still tend to the spirit of my conversation's mind, and would have everyone around me that would tune in also be favorable to the spirit of their mind and to give it time and patience for growth and for strength and for development. Because when able to do so, we are able to do so much more in this natural life. That is a mentally challenging experience that will make this living experience and everything that we have to go through seem like absolutely nothing. Because we're going through it within. It's more of a battle within than without. So our conversation shouldn't be alone in its journey. Our conversation shouldn't be alone in its journey. And if it is, just check inward. Just check inward for the type of character, for the type of disposition that you envision your character to be having. And have fellowship with that vision. Have fellowship with that vision, with the words of the scriptures as mediator.